There's something I wish someone had explained to me when I was younger. It would have saved me years of confusion, frustration, and second-guessing myself. Recently, I watched a close friend repeat a pattern I knew too well. He met a woman he really liked. She was intelligent, attractive, easy to talk to. And almost immediately, he tried to become the ideal version of himself. He replied to every message instantly. He agreed with all her opinions. He rearranged his schedule to be available whenever she was. He tried to anticipate what she wanted and become that. A few weeks later, she told him she just didn't feel a spark. He couldn't understand it. He had done everything right, or at least everything he thought he was supposed to do. That's when I realized something important. Many men aren't failing because they're bad people. They're failing because they're following advice that sounds good but doesn't create attraction. There's often a disconnect between what sounds good in theory and what actually builds emotional chemistry. Being kind, respectful, and thoughtful are essential traits. But attraction isn't built solely on politeness or perfection. It's built on authenticity, emotional presence, and confidence. Psychologist Carl Jung talked about the concept of the persona, the mask we present to the world. It's the version of ourselves we think will be accepted. The problem is, when you rely too heavily on that mask, people sense it. Even if they can't explain why, they feel that something isn't fully genuine. When a man hides his real opinions, suppresses disagreement, or constantly adjusts himself to be liked, he may believe he's being considerate. But what often comes across instead is uncertainty about who he really is. Attraction doesn't grow from performance. It grows from presence. We're often taught growing up to just be nice and everything will work out. And being kind absolutely matters. But attraction is more complex than simply being agreeable. It's not a logical checklist. It's emotional and instinctive. Sigmund Freud explored how much of our behavior is influenced by the unconscious mind. While some of his theories are debated today, one idea remains relevant. People aren't always consciously aware of why they feel drawn to someone. Much of it happens beneath the surface. When someone meets you, they're picking up on subtle signals: confidence, comfort in your own skin, emotional stability, whether you seem grounded or uncertain. These signals aren't processed like a spreadsheet. They're felt. And when a man constantly seeks approval, it can unintentionally communicate insecurity, not because he's weak, but because he's trying too hard to control the outcome. Real attraction begins when you stop trying to engineer it. Strength without harshness. A lot of men misunderstand what emotional strength actually looks like. It's not about being cold, dominant, or aggressive. It's about stability. It's about having boundaries and self-respect without becoming defensive or harsh. Jung also spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we tend to hide: anger, competitiveness, desire, ambition. Ignoring these parts doesn't make them disappear. It just makes us less integrated and more reactive. For example, imagine you're on a date and something genuinely bothers you. Maybe she makes a dismissive comment. Maybe she interrupts you repeatedly. Many men will brush it off to keep the peace. They don't want to risk tension. But consistently suppressing discomfort creates resentment, and resentment eventually shows up, either as passive aggression or emotional withdrawal. Healthy strength is the ability to calmly say, "That didn't sit right with me," without attacking or escalating. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche often wrote about self-ownership, about creating your own values rather than constantly seeking approval. In relationships, that translates to having your own standards and direction. Women, like anyone, tend to respect someone who respects himself. That doesn't mean being inflexible or controlling. It means knowing who you are and not abandoning that identity for validation. There's a big difference between being kind and being a pushover, being available and having no life outside the relationship, wanting someone and needing someone. Confidence isn't loud, steady. It's calm disagreement instead of silent resentment. It's caring deeply without losing yourself. And ironically, When you stop centering your entire identity around whether someone likes you, you become more attractive because you're no longer operating from fear. Speaking honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. Many men struggle with expressing discomfort in the moment. They avoid conflict, fearing loss of relationship. But avoidance creates a slow buildup of frustration. You say nothing, telling yourself it's not a big deal. But internally, tension grows. Freud described repression as pushing uncomfortable feelings out of awareness. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They resurface in other ways. The healthier alternative is direct but calm honesty. Instead of reacting emotionally, you communicate clearly. That comment caught me off guard. I'm not comfortable with that. Here's how I see it. Some people won't respond well to boundaries, and that's useful information. Not everyone is compatible with you, and that's normal. Taking responsibility for your growth is key. It's easy to blame the dating landscape or modern culture. But personal development always begins with looking inward. You can't control who is attracted to you. You can control whether you show up as your real self. Philosopher Albert Camus wrote about embracing uncertainty instead of demanding guarantees. Relationships are uncertain by nature. There is no perfect script, no guaranteed strategy. You can do everything right and still face rejection. That's not failure. That's compatibility filtering itself out. Presence over performance. Another common mistake is assuming you're being judged far more harshly than you actually are. Freud described projection, attributing your own fears to others. When you feel insecure, you may assume she sees every flaw. In reality, she's often focused on her own insecurities. Most people aren't analyzing you with a checklist. They're simply asking, do I feel comfortable here? Do I feel chemistry? Do I feel connection? Connection doesn't come from rehearsed lines or calculated behavior. It comes from presence, being fully engaged in the moment instead of worrying about outcomes. Rejection hurts because it can feel like a judgment of your worth. But it isn't. It's just a mismatch. When you build a full life, friendships, health, career goals, hobbies, dating becomes a complement, not a lifeline. You're not desperate for one person's approval because your identity isn't hanging on it. Abundance isn't pretending you have options. It's knowing your value isn't determined by one outcome. The real work? Ultimately, this isn't about figuring women out. It's about figuring yourself out. Jung called the process of becoming whole individuation, integrating your strengths, flaws, ambition, vulnerability, and boundaries into one cohesive self. When you're integrated, you stop shifting personalities depending on who you're with. You become consistent, grounded, real. Some people won't like that. That's okay. Authenticity naturally filters out incompatibility. The goal isn't to attract everyone. It's to connect deeply with someone aligned with who you actually are. You can be kind and firm, warm and self-respecting, vulnerable and strong. Those qualities are not opposites. They're balanced traits of a healthy adult. When you stop chasing validation and start building a meaningful life, relationships change. They become partnerships between two whole individuals, not two people trying to fill emotional gaps. The most freeing realization is this: you don't need to decode women. You need to develop yourself. Work on your emotional intelligence. Improve your communication. Build confidence through action, not approval. Create standards and live by them. Rejection will still happen. Disappointment will still happen. But you won't collapse because your foundation is internal, not external. Real connection happens when two authentic people choose each other, not when one person performs for the other. That's the difference. And it's work worth doing.